Welcome to the Strategic Leader Podcast with me, Gemma Bullivant, and my co-host, Fiona Craig. This podcast is for HR professionals and people-focused leaders from any function who want to think, act, and feel naturally more strategic. Enjoy the show. Hi everyone, and welcome back. It's great to have you with us. Hi Fee, how are you doing?
I'm good, Gemma. Thank you very much. How are you doing?
I am good, thank you. Tell me something you have done, Fee, that qualifies as being strategic in the last wee while.
I have been thinking about the way that I plan my working weeks and indeed sometimes my working days a little bit more strategically. So I've been asking myself the question, what is the single most important thing that I can do over the short term, and what's the single most important thing I can do over the long term? So I've given myself those two questions on a daily or weekly basis. It has really shaken up the way that I structure my time.
So that sounds wonderful. So tell us what we're going to be talking about today.
Well, we are going to be talking about how to work in teams, and we're going to be looking at a couple of assumptions that tend to be in place when we think about working in teams. We know why working in teams is important, but also if we think about work life today, most of the challenges that we have to solve in the workplace, we can't solve on our own, right? They require the expertise of a variety of different people. They're not just, the big things that we have to face as leaders can't really be solved by me sitting at my desk for 2 or 3 hours or 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 weeks, sweating over something, and then lo and behold, it's solved. I have to confer with others. I have to consult with others. I have to collaborate. I can't do it by myself. The thing that tends to trip us up, I think, is that we make an assumption it's easy. and often it can be easy. It can certainly be easy, enjoyable, but sometimes it's not. And there's a few things that trip us up when working with teams. And one of the things that, I've come across, you will have come across, is the idea of the kind of team change curve, the storming, norming, performing change curve in relation to teams. Is that something you've come across in your line of work?
Absolutely. Forming, storming, norming, performing is how I remember it. It does resonate, and I think that would be one of the reasons why it has kind of taken a bit of a hold as a management model over the years. However, for me, it has always felt a little bit like it relies on a lot of time.
Yes.
The luxury of time. They don't adapt particularly well when things change or when we haven't got very much time.
Oh, absolutely. Because if you asked anybody in a team, what stage are you at? None of them would really say, oh, we're definitely at the performing. They would always say, on the whole, well, we're probably coming out of storming towards norming. Really, I would say most people would say that about most teams.
No, just as an aside, if you're not familiar with the forming, etc. model, we'll put a link in the notes so you can have a little read up of it yourself.
It's one of those models that, looks really clever, but for someone like me who's dyslexic, those words are too similar, and it really requires a bit of brain power to work out which order they go in. What's the difference between them all? But I think, to your point, we don't have the luxury of waiting to evolve through all those different phases, do we? And, most teams at work, you're just going from one phase to the next, and then somebody will leave or somebody new join, and then you kind of have to start all over again. And as a team coach, I've come across a number of times organizations who want to get into team coaching. They really see the value in it and want to kind of kick off, but they're like, well, let's wait for this person to join, or we're just in a funny phase at the moment. Let's just wait for everything to settle down and then we'll do it. And I'm like, really? Is that really going to happen? Or are we going to be having exactly the same conversation in 3 or 6 or even 12 months' time? So what organizations really need is a different approach to creating and working in teams. It's much quicker. And you can basically do it over and over again whenever something changes, because let's face it, something is pretty much always going to change in any given month. Someone's going to leave, someone's going to come, someone, some business requirement is going to change, or product's going to change, a spec is going to change, a budget's going to change. We need to be able to kind of regroup and work differently as a team multiple times across
And
any given time period.
and quickly. So
Yeah.
I think what we're going to be doing is talking about a term I think you may have heard of called rapid teaming. Is that right?
Yeah, rapid teaming is a term that's created by a chap called David Clutterbuck, who is really well known in coaching and team coaching circles. But he's developed an approach to how to create teams quickly. So we know about team building, where maybe we will go and try and build a raft, or we go gin tasting. We know about team building. We know maybe about team development, where maybe we all go and learn about something, but actually it's more relevant for some people than others. We're not necessarily all going to use it in our day jobs. It's all very nice in the moment, but it's not terribly useful long term. It doesn't really make any material change. There's lots of team interventions, but rapid teaming is a really interesting one to think about, because it tells us what we need to do when we start working as a team, just to put a bit of shape and a bit of intention around how we show up as a team. The focus often is, what are we trying to deliver? What's the task? The purpose of rapid teaming gives us a little bit more about how do we need to show up and behave as a team. So if I just quickly walk through the 4 parts of this, and there's lots and lots of information that you can Google on this. David Clutterbuck's got some great YouTube videos that you can tap into as well if you want to look a little bit more about this. But the first thing is creating an understanding of how high-performing teams are created and how they evolve. So in headline form, in bullet points, none of these things are easy, but it is easier if you know what you're aiming for. Aligning around a shared purpose would be the first thing. Understanding and valuing each member's potential to contribute. What have we all got to bring to this team? What's our individual contributions to this team? Not our individual contribution to, this is what I'm doing and it's completely separate to everyone else, but what's my slice of the pie, because the pie is what we're all aiming for. And agreeing and clarifying what those key collaborative processes are. How do we need to work together in certain circumstances? How do we generate ideas? How do we make decisions? So just some education around how high-performing teams form and evolve is the first part of this rapid teaming process. And the second part, there's 4. The second part is around building psychological safety. I suspect we'll come back to this point about psychological safety afterwards, but it is, in short, it's creating an environment in which people can trust and collaborate, not necessarily comfortably. We sometimes seek comfort. Psychological safety is not necessarily comfortable, but it's safe for interpersonal risk taking, which means that we can have potentially tricky conversations with each other. We can get to know each other at the level of values. So not a kind of, what is your day job? What do you do for a living kind of conversations, but what's important to you? What makes you tick kind of conversations. That gives us a deeper knowledge of each other and a deeper, more authentic way of connecting with each other. Another thing that builds psychological safety is the idea of removing power and rank and status from meetings and interactions. So often we wait for the most senior person to speak first, or there's some sort of pecking order in the way that we contribute. We've all heard the expression hippo, the highest paid person's opinion. That will crop up sometimes. So getting rid of that and getting everybody on the team to have a kind of equal voice, and then leveraging diversity and this lovely expression, contrarian thinking. So the ability to go, look, we've all got really different perspectives. We've all got different approaches. Let's use that to our advantage, and let's be able to disagree with each other. Let's be able to challenge each other. Let's be able to throw lots of ideas into the mix.
Okay, that sounds great. There's lots to take in there. Before we move on to points 3 and 4, let me just recap on the first 2 points, so that I have understood it. So I think what I heard for the first point was around the purpose and role of the team, the foundational aspects of the team purpose as a whole. What are we here to achieve? How are we going to do it?
Yes.
That sort of thing. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my favorite questions in this context, what does the business or the organization require of this team?
Yes.
It comes from the outside. It's not like, ooh, what should our purpose be? That purpose already exists. The organization needs something from you. You have to look outside and then just agree how to articulate that.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So that was the first one.
Yeah.
The second one was some great stuff around psychological safety. We will come back to this because it's making me think of something else that I think is relevant to this topic as well in relation to that. But I loved the way that you described that, because there were three main things that I heard there. The first was around that aspect of risk, that it may not feel comfortable, but we feel safe to take interpersonal risks. And we've talked before about trust. We've talked about risk in different ways. But that whole concept of feeling safe is not the same as feeling comfortable. I loved the way that you put that.
I think sometimes people can roll their eyes at the idea of psychological safety, thinking it just means sitting around being nice to each other. And it absolutely doesn't mean that.
Yes, absolutely. And then I also heard something about equal voice in the room. Love the hippo analogy. I'd forgotten about that one, but the highest paid person's opinion is a wonderful way of remembering it in the moment, isn't it? That are we listening to the highest paid person's opinion here?
Yeah.
Or are we listening to all of the voices here to contribute to this topic? And then the third point that I heard was around contrarian thinking. So building from everybody's views, being part of the puzzle and part of the answer is actually inviting some different thinking, diversity of thinking, and so on.
And I think, diversity is such an important topic, but cognitive diversity is critical for creativity and problem solving.
Yes.
People think about things in different ways. And, this is where neurodiverse brains can really shine. I mean, we should absolutely be trying to tap into anybody who thinks slightly differently from the norm in this context.
Yes. Love it. So they're the first two.
Yes.
So tell us about number 3.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I've rattled through that so fast. It's part of my day job, so I know it very well, but I love it and get terribly enthusiastic and just go, oh, there's this and this and this. And then okay, let's slow down and let you keep up with me. So the third part of the idea of rapid teaming is the idea of managing self. Now, this is something that we've tapped into a lot generally in terms of our own strategic thinking. We are our best leadership tool, and how we manage ourselves, manage our kind of emotional responses, the idea of emotional regulation is quite critical. What does it mean for us to be a member of a team? There is a slight sacrifice, there's a slight cost to our autonomy when we join a team. We're not going to get everything going our way, really. A good team will demand that sometimes somebody else's idea is better than ours, or somebody else's approach is agreed upon, not ours. So there is a bit of a sacrifice or a cost to our way of thinking, our preference, our style. And we tend to not look at that. So when it happens, which of course it inevitably does, we tend to take it really personally. So we just have to look at ourselves with great awareness. And this is something we have talked about a lot on this podcast, specifically in series 2. A lot of the episodes focus on managing the self. And we also need to bring that to bear in the idea of rapid teaming, which is kind of, okay, what does it mean for me to be a member of this new team, or your personal identity, whilst you're creating a team that will have its own identity? So that's a huge and complex topic, but we need to be aware that whenever we are joining a team, it's going to create some compromises for us. Hopefully, they're going to be far outweighed by the benefits of working in a team. And sometimes we don't feel those compromises because the benefits are so great. So sometimes we don't need to pay attention. But mostly we do, because there will be a few bits that feel a bit prickly and feel a bit like my autonomy is definitely challenged. And it's not that that's a bad thing. It's just that it tends to trip us up because we don't expect it. So there's something about how we manage ourselves and how we show up.
Absolutely. I think that, self-awareness, I often say, is a superpower. And I'm thrilled that it's part of this model, because it really is critical to know enough about ourselves to know what we bring, but also where we might be blockers or hindrance to a particular situation. And I also love the word compromise that you use there, because there's an acceptance, isn't there, that we need to be ready to have, that involves the fact that maybe somebody else's input or somebody else's idea or somebody else's solution is going to be the one that people go with rather than our own.
Yes.
And that is okay. And we need to, as part of a team, we need to be ready to accommodate that and to make those sorts of compromises.
Yeah. And one of the ways that I think about it when I'm talking to teams that I'm coaching is that we're trying to shift from individual contributions to collective impact. So what sometimes happens in teams, particularly leadership teams, is that you kind of have maybe 5 or 6 people on the team. They're kind of each defending their own area. So let's say we have a head of marketing who's flying the flag for marketing. And we have a head of HR who's, defending HR and is sticking to the HR strategy and defending their position. And we might have a head of sales who's competing against the head of marketing. Everybody's kind of fighting and defending their corner. They're showing up. Their identity is related to their kind of core area of expertise. And, there can be a lot of good in that, right? It's not to say that that doesn't have value, but what we're looking for, rather than like, here's my contribution, it's like, we are all part of the same team and we're going to have an awful lot more impact if we join together at team level and then look at, okay, what can this team deliver for the business? That's quite hard in leadership teams.
Do you know, and I wonder, just from my own interactions with different teams and senior leaders over the years, I do wonder how many senior leadership teams would say that they have an identity as a team, as opposed to being a collection of their own functional expertise sitting in a room. And I think that's a really interesting question.
Absolutely. I do see it a lot. And I think the reason why they don't quite have an identity is because they haven't done that first point around shared purpose. You might have a business plan and some strategic objectives. But, what's the purpose? What are we here to do? That's the bit that's missing, which explains why they can't sort of do it, because they haven't done that first piece of that rapid teaming.
Yes. Okay. So we've had purpose of the team.
Yeah.
We've had psychological safety. We've had managing self.
We have.
What's the fourth one?
The fourth one, maybe a little bit more straightforward, but it's around team processes. Just consciously, intentionally deciding what are the processes we're going to follow as a team. Meetings. I mean, that's a big one, isn't it? How are we going to run these meetings? Well, what are our meetings for? So many times. You talk about teams and you go, how do you meet? You go, well, we've got an hour's team meeting every month or every week. And you go, well, how come it's an hour? Well, because it's always been an hour. And you kind of think, well, what we discuss and what we talk about fits into the hour rather than what do we actually need to do? And therefore, how do we need to meet? So that's not hard. It just requires us to give ourselves a prod and go, what is the purpose of this team? What are we required to do? Therefore, how do we meet? How do we share information? How do we make decisions? How do we communicate between ourselves and then communicate beyond that? Again, it's not that hard, but we forget to do it. And sometimes there's a massive magnetic pull towards that's the way we've always done it. Team meetings are an hour every month or every week. They don't have to be.
What else does the processes area involve other than meetings?
Decision making. I mean, a big one around decision making is that we tend to default to consensus decision making, where we just kind of keep talking about something until everyone's broadly happy, or everyone agrees, and that has its place. Sometimes that's absolutely the right approach, but gosh, it could take a very long time. And a lot of leadership teams waste a lot of time talking about the same thing over and over again because someone's kind of not happy with it. So we often don't truly make clear decisions and things stay lurking in the agenda or on your issues list for far longer than it should, because we're just waiting for a consensus decision.
And that just speaks to the compromise point that we touched earlier, doesn't it? That we haven't really acknowledged that there may need to be compromise in order to move forward with a decision, even if not everybody in the room is aligned to that decision. They need to be aligned to the fact that a decision is needed and we need to go with that.
Yes. So there's all kinds of, I mean, that's probably a whole other podcast episode around decision-making models and how to make decisions, but that's another one. Yeah. So meetings, sharing information, communication, decision-making are all those things that sit in that fourth point around team processes. So if you got a team together and you put them in a room for like a day, on day one of this project and say, right, don't leave this room until you've sorted all those 4 things out, or you've addressed those 4 things together in some way. Ideally, you might have a day or 2, but certainly, a matter of hours, and maybe keep coming back to them periodically. You've got something close to a high performing team straight away. You haven't had to wait for weeks and months and maybe even years for this team to just sort of naturally fall into a pattern and a routine that works. Because waiting that long probably means the requirement has changed and they're probably fit for purpose where we were 2 years ago, not where we are now.
Mm. And I just don't think we've got the luxury of time anymore.
We don't
I mean,
need
I'm
them.
not even sure we ever did, really, but some of these models suggest that perhaps there was a bit more time back in the day than I feel we have now. But this is reminding me of something Professor Amy Edmondson, who's done a lot of work on psychological safety, is purported to be one of the gurus on the topic. It's calling to my mind a fabulous short TED talk that I saw of hers on teaming on the fly.
Mm.
Because she was using this example that she'd observed where there were 33 miners in a Chilean mining disaster who were trapped. They had about a 10% chance of survival. To all intents and purposes, it looked like it was completely beyond any realms of possibility of rescuing any of them. But there was a rescue team and it was evolved rapidly, on the fly. A bunch of strangers.
Literally in the moment, I would, literally within a matter of hours, I would think.
Yes. All these people came together from loads of different backgrounds. They didn't know each other. They were effectively rapid teaming in the moment with 33 lives at stake. So you can imagine the pressure of that particular scenario. And spoiler alert, happily, all of the miners were successfully rescued. It took over 2 weeks for this team to sort that out, but they did. And the lessons that Amy Edmondson took from this, and she explains it in the TED Talk brilliantly, is that there were a few key factors involved in that successful outcome. The first one was psychological safety, which obviously is the cornerstone of her work. This was around the observation that the team members seemed to and reported to feel safe to take certain risks, felt safe to share ideas, felt safe to ask for help. And I suppose the survival aspect of it intensified that as well. I've got to park my own concerns because these people need our collective help.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it was a good case study of the whole concept of psychological safety. The second thing that she noticed was something she called situational humility. Now, what that meant was that they recognized, each individual person there recognized they didn't necessarily have all of the answers. So they were relying on that collective impact that you referred to.
Yeah. Yeah.
It encouraged open communication. It encouraged a sort of leaving your own ego at the door.
Yeah.
And bringing all of the ideas into a room. And I think probably, reading between the lines, enabling that compromise or that acceptance of somebody else's way rather than your own idea to take a hold, because there was that humility.
So that really picks up, doesn't it, on that idea in the David Clutterbuck model around removing power, rank, and status. It doesn't really matter who you are. You've got as much right to contribute and speak and be wrong and ask questions. So, while we talk about we want perhaps the more junior or less experienced people to feel like they can speak up. We also want the more senior or experienced people to be able to say, do you know what? I don't know. You tell me. I'm stuck. Where can we go from here? What have we missed? And ask those questions.
Absolutely. And of course, I don't remember the exact detail of the size of this team, but there were certainly a lot of people involved. So there would have been some hierarchies formed in terms of who was considered to be more senior than others. And the humility point does tend to relate specifically to the people who were in the more leader category of this group. The third thing that she highlighted was this idea of curiosity, of staying curious about each other's skills, of really helping each other to understand and bring forward what you can contribute versus the next person, and really being actively curious about that.
Yes.
The fourth thing she pointed out was around experimentation, so being okay with giving things a try. Now, obviously, that was with safety and all sorts of consequences carefully mapped out. But this idea of, we haven't tried that yet, shall we try that? That could actually be the answer. And it was in relation to all the different access points to get to this group of trapped miners. It was in relation to equipment that needed to be used. It was in relation to who needed to be involved in what aspect. There was a level of experimentation that enabled this outcome to be successful. And the last point she referred to was perseverance. And in particular, not just that people were willing to work all hours or go the extra mile, but more to do with, in the face of something that didn't go quite right, feeling like you've still got that grit and determination to keep going and try something else, keep going and find a different answer.
There's so much to unpick in there, isn't there? There's so many overlaps with the David Clutterbuck model, but let me just summarize that then. So first is the point of psychological safety, which we have talked about. But that clearly needs to be present in order for people to feel like they can share their ideas, share their questions. The idea of situational humility, which is, it really doesn't matter who you are. There's much right to be wrong or not know, as you do to speak up and and put an idea into the ring. Curiosity about what each can contribute. Again, that's that point about diversity and contrarian thinking in a way, isn't it? Which is, you're going to have ways of thinking about it that could solve this problem that I haven't got. And it's so easy to be judgmental about other people's differences, but to be curious about it is a different matter. I'm a massive fan of the idea of experimentation. In most of our day jobs, people's lives don't depend on the things that we are deciding about. If this is wrong, is this going to floor this entire company? We need to try things in the knowledge that some of the things that we try are going to be wrong, but is it safe to try them anyway? Because on the whole, it is going to be safe to try them.
And a real life example of that is Spotify's work from anywhere, which when they first came out in the pandemic era, let's call it that, the first iteration of their work from anywhere policy was published on the very clear basis that it will iterate.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's been a massive part of its success and the traction that it has gained, is helping people to recognize that it might change. But we're going to give it a go rather than sit on it until we've perfected it. We're actually going to put it out there, but we will in all likelihood iterate aspects of it. And that speaks about experimentation as well.
And that's exactly right. And that brings us back to this point about rapid teaming and teaming on the fly, which is that we haven't got time to sweat over every detail to get this right. So let's try it on the basis that we can probably tweak it. There's so much in that. So two slightly different but overlapping approaches to how to create high-performing teams, or how to go a really good distance to creating high-performing teams. That is a quicker approach than the traditional model, storming, norming. We will put into the show notes because it does have some things to teach us, but I don't think it's really the optimal model that certainly I would follow in a team coaching capacity, not least of all because I can't say it. But we don't have time, so we need to be able to create our teams and work together as teams quicker. And I think a lot of that comes down to just taking a moment before we crack on with the task to think about some of these things and say, how are we going to be as a team before we start the work? And that doesn't have to be the work of weeks and months. It could literally be the work of days or even just hours.
Great stuff. I feel a lot better informed about rapid teaming. Thanks very much for your fabulous insights, Fee. I think we'll wrap it there and look forward to talking to you again and seeing everyone next time.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Strategic Leader. If you liked the episode, please subscribe to access more of our recordings. And if you think it'd be useful for someone else, please forward to them and leave a review. We base our content on questions we are regularly asked and what you want to know more about, so please do email us with any questions or comments to gemma@gemmabullivant.co.uk. And remember, you're already being more strategic than you realise.